Knowledge management continuity has been mentioned. One thing which is important maybe is cooperation with sector-specific authorities. That comes in the context of market opening, liberalization, where it's important to make an informed choice of instruments when dealing with a market failure. You take the example of telecoms maybe. We have problems with competition in the telecoms market, which is gradually being liberalized or open to competition. Then it's important that maybe the competition authority goes to the sector-specific, the telecoms regulatory authority, and say, hey, we have a problem here. What should we do? Should we use the sector-specific regulation? Should we use the competition rules? Should we use both? And now these things of contacts are very, of thinking is quite important. And also advocacy. It always comes in. In transition economies, I'm convinced that the large companies, they have lawyers, they have people, they know what's going on. Really small companies, they are not of great importance for the economies. I always say concentrate on advocacy to the SMEs, because their knowledge level could be relatively low. They are in the markets, they're doing their business, and in transition economies, they can have quite a big importance for the general economy. Yes, enforcement. The first point may look very, very self-evident to you. Law enforcement must be the overriding priority. But I've seen examples of agencies that where this has not been the case. Other things that are easier could be done instead. But I have to say there are no shortcuts. To become an effective agency, there's only one thing that really helps. It's learning by doing. And a couple of things that I've noticed as well, beware of trigger happiness. And the trigger happiness is that the new enforcement agency is so keen, we have to have a case, we have to stop a merger. And you choose the wrong case, and you lose. And I've seen the opposite as well, which is enforcement anxiety, which I say, we must get it right. We mustn't lose in court, and we really need to find the right case, and nothing happens. And I also seen what I call excessive market monitoring. It's a potential excuse for passivity. People say we have to monitor the market. We have to know everything about the market, and you could have a fancy title like Chief Intelligence Officer or something. In reality, it could be that you sit there and read a bunch of trade magazines. And that's not the way it should be. It's a lack of resources. And also it's important to realize that you don't need in-depth market knowledge in all markets for enforcement purposes. If you're an experienced person, you can quickly read the market and understand how it works. There are certain exceptions. I mean, financial services, you don't understand anything unless you're really into it for quite some time. Pharmaceuticals might be another. I did a joint venture, actually, for nuclear power stations. Siemens Areva was the easiest case I ever did. But, I mean, these are the most complex products in the world, but the market definition was dead simple. A word also about... you might have heard these EU sector inquiries, where we take a holistic view and make a very in-depth analysis of an entire market. But they are very resource-intensive, and they're of limited use unless they're followed up by solid enforcement. So it's not something that we would recommend that you engage in a sort of a beginner, emerging competition authority. Next page, I move on to enforcement. Also a bit self-evident. I've touched upon that. Choose cases and priorities carefully. Learn to crawl before you can walk. And here, there might be disagreement from the lawyers. Cartels seems to me to be a good candidate to start with in transition economies, because there are likely to be a lot of cartels around. They are predominantly evidence-based, You don't need a lot of economic analysis, in fact, very little economic analysis. And if you compare it, we discussed yesterday, pricing abuses, margin squeeze, predatory pricing, and so on. They're extremely resource-consuming, hard to prove, and you need sophisticated economic analysis. And there are always discussions. We even discuss, for instance, is margin squeeze an abuse, or is it a type of, is it something related to predatory pricing? So that is not, I think, is a beginner's type of case. And also, for the lawyers, the outcome and the calculations may always be challenged, more or less plausibly. If you look at all our cases for predatory pricing, margin squeeze, the other side always claim that we got our calculations completely and utterly wrong. Judiciary. How should you design the judiciary? Should you have one or several appeal courts in the first instance? Should you centralize it to one court, or do you have it decentralized to a lot of courts? Should you have specialist or generalist judges? The obvious answer, I would think, is to have specialist judges. But if you have generalist judges, you could have a problem. But you could assist them maybe by competition policy specialists, for instance, from academia. That was a solution that was chosen in Sweden, where I came from, where actually economics professors formed part of the actual court. So they were part of the court, and they were assisting the judge, and they had voting rights actually on deciding on the case. Next question is how should we train judges, and who should do it? In the early 90s, when Sweden also quickly decided it should join the European Union, and the old competition law was torn in pieces and put in the waste paper basket overnight, and there was an EU-compatible law introduced. And the judges, they didn't know anything about competition law. So we said at the competition authority, let's train them. And they agreed, okay, they came over. I was one of them, a few of us, 20 years ago, so we were significantly younger. We had a nice day, the first day, and the second day it was supposed to go on, but the Director General got a telephone call from the minister saying, what the hell are you doing? Stop immediately, because we don't want the prosecutor educating the judge. But then the question is, who should do it, and where do we find the right people? The point I made that point before. Actually, the competition authority should pay utmost attention to procedural issues. Otherwise, things may go wrong unnecessarily. Cooperation between competition authorities. I think there's a huge potential here, because in this region there are strong historic, cultural, linguistic, and economic ties. And me coming from the far north, I make a comparison with the Nordic cooperation with the competition authority, which has been going on since the 1970s, I think. This year they went and had the Nordic meeting on Greenland, in Greenland. Quite an interesting place to go. 35,000 inhabitants, they have a fully fledged competition authority. Here in the Balkans, countries, it's also similar. Countries represent different stages towards EU membership. We have a member, Slovenia, we have Croatia, we have candidates, potential candidates, and that's also a similar situation to the Nordic countries. Some countries are inside, some countries are outside. One country, Iceland, is negotiating, and so on. And the competition authorities in the Western Balkans is quite clear. They are on different levels of experience and maturity. So there should be substantial synergy effects. And also cooperation, I think that Beth will mention that, may be formalized. I mean, you could have a permanent secretariat, but it's not necessary. You could have virtual organizations like the ICN, for example. So I think that's more or less it. We're here. We are not We are bureaucrats, and we're actually, although I get upset sometimes and passionate, we're actually nice people. And don't hesitate to call Brussels, which sometimes is a symbol of everything evil on earth, but that's not really true. So please don't hesitate to call us. I don't know everything. I don't know very little, in fact. But I can promise you that I can find the right person who knows the answer to your question. So please don't hesitate to call Brussels. I think that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. That was really something, a great presentation, and we, I think, learned all.